Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing weeks 35 and 36 of my 2022 reads. Since last week I was a little too busy to film, so I'm wrapping it up this week as well. But I don't actually have all that many things to talk about, even though it's 2 weeks, since if you remember my last weekly wrap up, I had sort of entered a bit of a reading slump, and that is very apparent in my books for these 2 weeks. I had a whole string of DNFs, and then I did a bunch of comfort rereads, but I'm starting to get out of that reading slump now, and I did finish one really great memoir. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, let me talk about my DNFs. You'll get an idea of the reading mood that I was in. I ended up actually pausing a ton of other books that I was in the middle of because I wanted to stop DNFing everything. So definitely take with a grain of salt the fact that I DNF these books because I was in a bit of a reading mood. But in any case, I did DNF them. The first one that I DNF'd I was so sad about, and that was The Grief of Stones by Katherine Addison. So this is a sequel to The Witness for the Dead, which I had really loved. It's this cozy fantasy mystery that's a spin-off from The Goblin Emperor, which is an amazing book, and I was really looking forward to this sequel in that kind of cozy mystery series, and it just did not work for me. I got through 30% of this, and even that I was struggling with. There were a lot of tics in the writing that were just getting to me, things like the main character introducing himself to every single character, and there's just like maybe 20 or 30 of those in that first 30%. Just things like that where I just was getting really nitpicky with everything, and I was frustrated with some of the decisions, things that just didn't make sense to me. So even though I had really loved the previous book, this one totally did not work for me. I DNF'd it, and I think that means it's a DNF for the series for me, which is such a sad thing. And I thought about maybe I could come back to this later on, but the thing is, once you see those things in the writing, it's one of those things you can't unsee. So I'm pretty sure that it's a permanent DNF, and that makes me so sad because I was really looking forward to this. Definitely don't let this shy you away from this book. I think it is my mood, but yeah, it was an unfortunate experience. Next, I DNF'd Sightseeing by Rattawut, Lapcharoensap, which is a short story collection that I heard about from Freddie at Sluggish Reader, who I'll link below. And it had sounded like such a cool short story collection when Freddie talked about it. It is by a Thai-American author, and it just talks about kind of Thailand and the experience, and like has a lot of really interesting commentary. And I think that all of that is true about this collection, but the writing style just ended up not working for me. So I read the first story, I got 10% into the book, and I just wasn't clicking with that writing style. It was a little bit too graphic for me, and not in terms of violence, but just in terms of descriptions. This just kind of grossed me out. I've found that some literary fiction actually does this. Isabel Allende, for example, I really struggled with her writing. It just is too graphic in the description of everything. It just grosses me out. It also, that first story at least, has very kind of a heavy feel, a lot of just bad people, bad situations, and not necessarily like a nice easy conclusion, which is definitely a thing that literary fiction does more, that I struggled more with. I'm glad that I tried the collection, but it just wasn't for me. And then the last book that I DNF'd was The Secret Life of Groceries by Benjamin Lorr. And I was listening to this on audiobook, and I DNF'd it immediately after like 1%. I think I got a couple of minutes into the audiobook, and I was just like, absolutely not. And this is another thing where I think the writing style just didn't work for me. I have considered not even mentioning this because I got so little bit into the story, but I really disliked the beginning of this. I think I picked this up because I thought, oh, microhistory, kind of delving into what's going on with grocery stores. That sounds cool. And I missed like the subtitle, which is something like the dark story of grocery stores or something like that. And when I started listening to the audiobook, the the way that the author narrates it, he narrates it himself, is just so overly like gritty and dramatic. I just was not into that. And then the way that things were described, like he starts by describing this like a fish counter, and he describes the fish as slimy little bastards. And I'm just like, what? That's so unnecessary. Why are we even doing that? And at that point, I just realized this is not the writing style for me. I'm not going to enjoy this. And I just DNF'd it, so not for me. So then, since my reading mood was just not great, I decided to go ahead and allow myself some more comfort rereads of Georgette Heyer, and that really, really worked for me. So the first of these, I read 3 of them, that I picked up was Frederica, and Frederica is just fantastic. This is absolutely one of my favorites of hers. It is so funny and just so much fun. So this is a Regency romance, and the basic premise is that Frederica, who is in her mid-20s, comes to London with a bunch of her younger siblings in order to try to launch her younger sister, Caris, into society. And Caris is incredibly beautiful, not maybe the smartest girl, but really, really sweet. And she wants Caris to have that opportunity to, you know, meet somebody, fall in love, get married, etc. And she also has 2 of her younger brothers with her who are such great characters. One who's a teenage boy that is very serious. He wants to study and become a pastor. He is, you know, very into all of that, and kind of struggles with some like emo tendencies. And then her youngest brother, Felix, who is about 10 years old, a total imp, and is so into engines and mechanics and gets into quite a bit of trouble. And she doesn't really know anybody in London, and so she reaches out to a distant cousin, somebody that her father had spoken well of and said, hey, you know, maybe this cousin can help introduce us to society. Maybe he's got a wife or something like that. Turns out that her cousin is actually so distant on the family tree that he didn't even really know who they were. And he is somebody who's very rich and very self-centered, right? And doesn't really do anything for anybody else. But he's very amused by Frederica and her siblings and decides to go ahead and help them out, partly to spite his other sisters who are constantly asking him for things. And so they end up having this connection, and just so many antics ensue. It is hilarious. A lot of like almost comedy of errors type of antics. Really, really funny. I loved the banter. I loved the characters, and the way that they kind of slowly fall in love over the course of the story is excellent. And the way that the hero really connects with especially her 2 younger brothers are great. Yeah, this is just so much fun. Absolutely loved this. It's such a great comfort reread for me. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Venetia by Georgette Heyer, and this is another one that I love. I've read multiple times. This centers around Venetia, who is in her mid-20s, and she is very, very isolated. She lives in a small town, and her father was very much a recluse, kind of completely kept them away from society, didn't allow anybody to really come and visit their house, that sort of thing. And her brother, who is now in charge since her father passed away, is off fighting Napoleon, but even though the war has ended, he hasn't come back for quite a few years because he's pretty irresponsible. She's been in charge of the household for many, many years, and she's very comfortable with that, very in charge of herself and the world around her. She also is in charge of her younger brother, who is a teenager, and he's basically really, really smart, a classics scholar, and he's getting ready to kind of prep and go to like college, basically. But he also has like a problem with his hip, so he's got some pain there and has a limp and this sort of thing, and deals with a lot of people being very ableist towards him. And into their lives comes a neighbor, a guy who basically his family has owned the land next to theirs for a long time, but this guy is a complete degenerate. He's somebody who just gambles and, you know, goes with women and does all sorts of things, completely excluded from polite society. But he ends up making friends with them, and Venetia finds that this guy, who basically used to be a classic scholar himself, really connects with her brother, and also really connects with her because they have a very similar sense of humor and they both like to quote classic works to each other and all these sorts of things. So he's a bit of a rake, but they form such a great bond, except that everybody around them is like, no, you guys, you can't be together at all because Venetia is this innocent young girl and this guy is just a total degenerate. And so it's them kind of overcoming that issue. And it's got a lot of really cool interactions between them, these sorts of things. There is a lot of ableism in this towards her younger brother, but what's really interesting, especially since this was written, I'm not sure, in the 1950s or 60s, is the way that it's portrayed in this, where it's very much shown that even people who are super kind to the brother in their eyes are very patronizing, and it's shown to be really awful. And one of the great things about the hero in this is that he never patronizes the younger brother. He just treats him as like somebody who he connects with on a deep level because of their love of the classics and all these sorts of things. And so it's very interesting to see that in an older book, that kind of representation of disability and ableism. And I was actually surprised because sometimes you read older books and you go back to them and you're a little shocked by the bad representation. But this one I actually thought was pretty good. The only thing that in this book got to me a little bit was that it's not at all bad on the writing part. It's almost too good on the writing part. At one point there is a woman who comes into town who's incredibly antagonistic to Venetia, like so antagonistic, and that stressed me out so much. So that was the only thing that was a little bit of a detriment to the story, but everything else I really, really loved. So I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last comfort reread that I had was These Old Shades by Georgette. So this is another historical romance. This one is set in the mid to late 1700s in France, mainly, partly in England, but mainly in France. And it is a really fun story. This one is as much sort of adventure as it is romance. And the basic premise is that the heroine of this story, Leonie, has for many years been raised as a boy. So she goes by Leon, and she has been raised by a boy because her older brother, who's kind of a jerk, wanted to open up a tavern, and he wanted her to not be a girl because that's very inconvenient. He thought it would be more convenient to have her be a boy. So for the past 7 years, she's been a boy. But she decides to kind of run away from him because he's kind of abusive. And she runs into the Duke of Avon. And the Duke of Avon is a guy who is known as Satanas. He is very much seen as an evil guy because he is a gambler and he's very much dangerous, and he will ruin somebody's life just like that. He is really seen as quite a bad person. Lots of people in society respect him, but they're scared of him and they think he's not a good guy. But she ends up running into him, and he makes her into his page because he's, you know, he sees her and he thinks of a plan to use her in her boy form. But over the course of the story, they sort of come together. He ends up really growing as a person, and she eventually ends up, you know, coming out as a girl, these sorts of things. But really, this story is just a little bit wild. There's abductions, there's fights, there's so much intrigue, there are a lot of battles of wits, and Leonie is such a fun character. She really grows over the course of the series as well, and she's so obnoxious at times. I love her character. So this is just an absolute joy to read. Really, really fun. And also the descriptions of the clothes are amazing. Really love that time period. So love this book and gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I did read one new book, which was so good, The Impossible City by Katherine Cheung. This is a memoir that I listened to on audio. Katherine Cheung reads it herself, and it was so good. This is a really interesting mixture of Katherine Cheung's memoir of her own life, but mixed in with that is a lot of commentary on politics and society and culture in Hong Kong, where she's from. So this book walks you through her life, but in each period, she's relating what was going on in her life to issues that exist in Hong Kong. So stuff like she talks about her depression and suicide attempts, and then talks about mental health issues in Hong Kong and the mental health system, and how difficult it is to get health care. She talks about the issues that she had with housing, where housing is so expensive that during kind of her young adulthood, when she was going to college, these sorts of things, she would have so many different roommates. She would just be crashing on couches or on the floor, these sorts of things, and talks about a lot of the politics that go into how land is used and these sorts of things. And she talks quite a bit about the way that mainland China is taking over Hong Kong. So the transition between British rule and Chinese rule, where Hong Kong is supposed to have this like 50 years of independence, but China has very, very much like said, I guess we're just gonna start taking over a little bit early. And so she talks about the protests in Hong Kong against that. She talks about just so much of that political stuff. And I thought that this book was absolutely fascinating. I loved her writing style. I loved her narration. I loved the way that she just talked about her own experiences and talked about so many of the complexities of life in Hong Kong. And just, it was so cool. So I really, really thoroughly recommend this memoir if you have any interest in memoirs, if you want to learn more about Hong Kong and just kind of life there. I thought it was such a great audiobook, such a great book. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that's everything that I DNF'd and read for the past couple of weeks. I'm glad that my mood has finally improved, and I'm in the middle of a couple of other books right now, and I'm really loving them, so I'm hopeful that I'll do better going forward on actually finishing books and not just DNFing them. If you guys have read any of these books, if you're interested in them, if you want to let me know what you've been reading this week, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.